Well, good morning, everyone. Welcome back to Morning Musings. My name is Don K. Preston. I'm the president of Preterist Research Institute of Ardmore, Oklahoma, and I do appreciate you being with me so very much. Hope you had a fantastic weekend. I got to go to the Conroe, Texas swap meet. Boy, it's a long way down there. It's about 5.5 hours down there, and it just seemed like they stretched the road every year. I don't know. But anyway, I was then privileged to teach a class at the Fellowship Church in Houston. Not Houston, Huntsville, Texas. Some very good friends of ours attend services there, and they teach this class on a regular basis. Somehow, some way, they heard that I was going to be at the Conroe swap meet. I didn't advertise that I was going to do that, but nonetheless, they contacted me and they said, hey, we want you to stay over on Saturday night, come to church with us and teach class on Sunday morning. So I did. Now, my lesson was on Temple to Telos. That's the name of a brand new book that, Lord willing, will be published before the first of the year. My teaching of that class yesterday was the very first time I've ever presented the material publicly. I am absolutely stoked, primed, excited about that material. It is absolutely awesome. It's really, really, really simple, but it is totally 100% fatal to all futurist eschatologies. Yeah, it is. So, be looking for that book in the very near future, okay? So, we are back to our study of the Olivet Discourse. We have spent a good long time establishing the relationship between Matthew 25:31, 2 Thessalonians chapter 1, and Isaiah 66. And the reason for that is very, very simple. If it is true, pardon me, I did a lot of talking over the weekend, so my voice is a little bit weak. But if it is true that the coming of the Lord of Matthew 25:31 and following is the coming of the Lord of 2 Thessalonians chapter 1, and if 2 Thessalonians chapter 1 is the coming of the Lord of Isaiah chapter 66, then that means that 2 Thessalonians chapter 1 is the coming of the Lord to bring in the new creation, since that's what Isaiah 66 is all about. But wait a minute. If that's true, then since everyone already admits that Matthew 25:31 and following is the coming of the Lord to bring in the new creation, then we have an unbroken chain of connections between Isaiah 66, Matthew 25:31, 2 Thessalonians chapter 1. Well, that demands, ladies and gentlemen, it doesn't just slightly indicate it or maybe sort of kind of in a way. It demands that Matthew 25:31 and following was fulfilled at the coming of the Lord in the judgment of Old Covenant Israel and vindication of the martyrs in AD 70. Now, let me vindicate that, pun intended, by demonstrating that 2 Thessalonians chapter 1 is the coming of the Lord at the end of the millennium to bring in the new creation, which of course is the coming of the Lord in Matthew 25:31, the great white throne judgment at the end of the millennium. Everybody follow that? Here's my point. 2 Thessalonians chapter 1 equals Revelation chapter 20. The end of the millennium. The end of the millennium, the great white throne judgment, is the judgment of Matthew 25, 31 and following. If therefore the coming of the Lord of 2 Thessalonians chapter 1 is the coming of the Lord of Revelation chapter 20, the end of the millennium judgment, then that would therefore demand that Matthew chapter 25, 31 was fulfilled at the coming of the Lord of 2 Thessalonians chapter 1 in AD 70. How do we go about proving that? Well, Paul, in promising relief from their then ongoing persecution at the hand of the Jews in 2 Thessalonians chapter 1, he said, to those of you who are being, that's present, active, those of you who are being persecuted, pressured, relief when the Lord Jesus is revealed from heaven. Now watch this. In flaming fire, taking vengeance on those that do not know God and that do not obey the gospel. These shall be punished with everlasting destruction away from the presence of the Lord. Notice that he says that relief, that coming of the Lord, would be the coming of the Lord in flaming fire. Right? Well, let me just turn right over here to Revelation chapter 20. Now, I don't have to tell you that the millennium is one of the more challenging doctrines in all of Christianity. You know, people argue about it, they discuss it, they get frustrated about it, etc., etc., etc. There are those within even the preterist community who hold to an eternal millennium. They hold to what they call a premillennial parousia millennium. They believe the Lord came in AD 70 to initiate the eternal, unending millennium. I don't believe that's tenable, and I believe what I'm about to share with you sort of kind of falsifies that. In Revelation chapter 20, you have the initiation of the millennium, Revelation 20, 1 to 4. Now, I want you to notice that in Revelation chapter 20, verse 7 and following, now when the 1,000 years have expired, Satan will be released from his prison and go out to deceive the nations which are in the four corners of the earth, Gog and Magog, to gather them together to battle, whose number is the sand of the sea. They went up the breadth of the earth, surrounded the camp of the saints and the beloved city, and fire came down out of heaven and destroyed them. You have Gog and Magog, whose number is like the sand of the sea. Now, you're probably familiar with the fact that out of all the nations, the number one nation that was always described like the stars of heaven and like the sand of the sea was Old Covenant Israel. So what happens here? At the end of the millennium, Satan is released and goes out to gather the nations for the great battle of Gog and Magog at the end of the millennium, don't forget. But fire comes out of heaven and destroys them. So you have Gog and Magog doing war, desiring to do war with the saints. Fire comes down from heaven and destroys this nation that is like the sand of the sea. Fire comes down from heaven. Well, let's see. That means in Revelation chapter 20, you have the persecutors of God's people. You have Satan, the persecutor of God's people, destroyed when fire comes down out of heaven and destroys them. And you got 2 Thessalonians chapter 1, the promise of the coming of Christ out of heaven in flaming fire to destroy the persecutors of God's people. In 2 Thessalonians chapter 1, the persecutors of God's people are the Jews. Acts chapter 17. In Revelation, the persecutor of God's people is who? It is Babylon, the city where the Lord was crucified. Now, I don't know about you folks, but that's a that's a pretty powerful connection of the dots. I believe this has to at least be considered. I must confess to you that I just recently saw these connections, still working to work out, shall we say, some of the details. But I believe that this connection of these dots is extremely, extremely powerful if it stands scrutiny. And I'll openly confess to you, maybe someone can come up with, rebuttal of this. Okay, that's fine. I'm not married to it yet. I might be engaged pretty heavily to it, but I'm not married to it yet. So let me encourage you to take it, to ponder it, examine it, dissect it, and if you think there's serious flaws in it, feel free to contact me. Make your comments on YouTube. Make your comments on Facebook. All right? In the meantime, hey, don't forget my October 2022 U.S. orders only 3-book special. You order my book, We Shall Meet Him in the Air, The Wedding of the King of Kings, and you will get free of charge, Can God Tell Time, and In Flaming Fire, no postage charge at all. Totally postage free. All right? Thanks so much for joining me here on Morning Musings. I'll see you on the flip side.